All right, welcome to another episode of Restoring Your Voice with me, your host, Pastor David. So glad that you could join us. I say us because it's Tuesday. You're watching this. That means it's interview day. All right, I got Scott in the shoot ready to go. We're going to talk about Christians fulfilling their purpose and how he helps people out with that. So stay tuned.
Till the day I die.
Restoring your voice.
Till the day I die. Till the day I die, I'll be radical.
You want to be a radical for Jesus? You want to use your voice for the glory of God? Well, then this is the show for you. And I'm going to help you do just that. So welcome to the show. Alrighty then, welcome back real quick before we get started. Hey, if this show is a blessing to you, and I hope that it is, would you consider being a blessing in return? There's 3 ways that you can do that down in the description. PayPal, Venmo, Cash App, any amount would be greatly appreciated so we can keep this thing going as long as we can. All right. So with that, I'm going to bring my guest on. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Hey, David, it's great to be here.
Yeah, I was glad we could, we were able to reschedule after I got sick with COVID. And here
I'm
you
glad you're feeling better.
Thanks. So I guess before we get started, why don't you just tell people about yourself, what your ministry is all about?
Sure, absolutely. So I've done a lot of different things in my life. I was a school teacher for about 16 years. I taught science. And then I went into the corporate world. I actually went from school teaching to writing tests for a living. So my students said I joined the dark side. You can figure that one out.
Right.
I did that for about 11 years. I ran a team of about 100 and something people. I did contracts all over the country. I was on a plane all the time, flying in and out, talking to school boards, meeting with clients, doing all of that sort of work. Kind of got tired of that. I started a coaching business on the side. My mother laughs and says, dude, you've been coaching since you were 8 years old. You just didn't call it coaching, So I have always been that guy that kind of helped other people and people kind of used as a sounding board and all of that. So I started getting some training and doing some work in coaching. And then over a few years, I took that full time. And so now I run Inspired Stewardship Coaching. I consider myself a stewardship coach. So my tagline is I help Christians master their time, their talent, and their treasures so that they can live out their calling. So I work in those areas as a coach. I do it all remote. I do it via Zoom. So I work with clients all over the world, helping them do those things. Most of my clients are Christian. A lot of them are business owners, not 100%, but a lot of them are. I'm married. My wife, Carrie, and I've been married 27 years. We got a 19-year-old son that I jokingly call my little boy. He's like 6'5" and about 240. So there's nothing little about him, but he's working now and we're very proud of him. He's a great young man. He's turned into a tremendous spirit with a great heart for God and for other people. So he's kind of figuring out what he wants to do when he grows up, so to speak. He's still in that stage, but he's out working for a living and doing those sorts of things. We live in a small town called Lake Hills in the middle of nowhere. I just tell people I live 45 minutes from the closest Starbucks, Walmart, or McDonald's. We do live out in the country, so we kind of have to travel to go everywhere. I think you do too. So it sounds like from what you were saying earlier. And, we have a little church up the road, a Methodist church that we're part of. I'm very heavily involved with the Methodist church. I'm actually the director of what they call lay servant ministries for the Rio, Texas conference in South Texas. So I help other lay people learn how to do their calling in the Methodist church and help equip them and enable them to do that. So that's kind of another thing that I do on the side that's really connects to a lot of what I do as a coach, but I do that also for the Methodist church here in South Texas as well.
South Texas? Where is South Texas?
So I live outside of San Antonio. That's the closest town of size.
All right,
so
no, that's
I'm in
fine.
the hill country.
I'll give you a guess where I'm at. Corpus
Where?
Christi.
Oh, okay. So yeah, you're in Texas speak. That's right up the road.
Right,
It's about,
exactly, exactly.
about 150 miles. It's right up the
Right.
road.
2 hours is nothing in Texas.
Yeah. Now, if you drive 2 to 3 hours, you're like, oh yeah, that's close. And people in Connecticut are like, you can go to 4 states in 2 hours. But yeah,
Right, which is I'm originally from Connecticut, by the way,
there
so
you go. Okay, I didn't know that. That was just
yeah.
a lucky guess. So, I've lived in Texas my entire life. So I've been born and bred in Texas. Lived in the San Antonio area the vast majority,
Okay.
not in San Antonio, but in that area. I've lived in Pleasanton and other areas as well, and even went to college here in Texas. So
Yeah, well, I gotta say, I love Texas. Didn't never planned on living in Texas, not because I didn't like Texas, just never planned on it, and
sure.
God called us here, and so here we are, and I can't complain.
Well, we'll consider you a Texas adoptee. We get a lot of people that end up living here, whether they thought they were going to or not. So
I'll hold that as a badge of honor then. So
yeah, there's even a badge that'll actually, some people say that I wasn't born in Texas, but I got here as fast as I could.
right,
That's kind of a thing that you'll see around here.
I love that. I love that. All right, so what is this whole? I don't know, helping Christians. You're saying fulfill their purpose, right? I mean,
Mhm.
I don't know if you want to flesh
Sure.
that out is any way you can. 'Cause I'm sure people are like, "What do you mean?" I don't know. Maybe some people think this. Maybe people see it that way. I'm sure people have tons of different views about this.
Mhm.
But
So calling is one of those things that are purpose, if you want to use that word, and they kind of overlap a lot, or people use them somewhat interchangeably. The thing I think that's most important to understand is that calling is not necessarily your assignment. Now, let me clarify. Assignment is kind of what you do. Calling is why you do it. And that's one of the things I think we mistake, is a lot of times we think of our calling as our career or our job or the volunteer work we do, or even the job that we do of raising children, or being a spouse. Those kind of roles and responsibilities, those are assignments. Those are tasks that you do, jobs that you do, roles that you fulfill, these sorts of things. They can vary greatly over your life. Again, use me as an example. I was a school teacher. That's an assignment. I worked in the corporate world. That's an assignment. Now I'm a coach. That's an assignment. But my calling is sort of the why behind it. I really am one of those people that I'm really good at taking complex tasks and breaking it down into simpler steps. I did that in all of my assignments. All of the tasks that I did, all of the roles that I did, that's part of the bent that I have, the natural wiring I have, the way God designed me. I'm one of those people that like I said, my mom said, dude, you've been coaching since you were 8 years old. You just didn't call it coaching. I was always the sounding board for other people. I was always the confidant. I was always the person that people came to and said, I need help figuring out how to do this. Again, I did that. I served that part out in all of the different assignments that I've had. As well, at some level, if you are a believer, we all have the same assignment, right?
right.
God sent us out to make disciples. We're all doing that in some way, shape, or form. So at some level, all of us have a common assignment, but then within that bigger umbrella, you have natural bents or talents or directions that God has designed you, that you kind of want to flow in that direction. Life is easier then. You're more, you're not necessarily happier, you're not even necessarily more content, but you're more energized, you're more enabled, you're more empowered. It feels right. Doesn't mean it's easy,
right,
but it feels right, and those are kind of the calling sorts of statements. Now that's still kind of cloudy, because I think a lot of times we need to spend a lot of time and work and effort and conversation and prayer and meditation and seek the input of other people. And, it's not always easy to clarify what is that you're supposed to be doing and what does that look like for you. It's not a simple, oh yeah, this is my calling. You don't wake up one day and go, that's it. Usually, it's not an event. It's a process to kind of discover that calling underneath it.
Gotcha. Yeah, no, I understand that. Yeah, so I mean, I didn't know I was ever going to be called to do this type of thing. I mean,
Hmm.
it was a process for me. So decades long, if I be honest. Just joined the
Hmm.
army just because I needed money. you know,
Yeah.
money.
So I need you to eat, and this was a way to get paid enough to eat.
Right. Yeah, it's enough. Right. This is the right way. So I need money, and it turned out that I had a way of lead people. I
Hmm.
didn't know that. I had no idea that. You know, So like you were saying, assignments, right? The army was an assignment, right? We
Right.
can't stay in the army forever. We have to, obviously move on. We all move on from different things. So I guess, well,
But my bet is within that assignment of the Army, there were things that you found that you were able to do that even looking back before the Army had some commonalities to things that you were doing or not doing as a child and to today. That, in other words, a lot of times we connect the dots in reverse.
mhm,
Looking backwards is easier than looking forwards. So we
right,
start looking backwards and it's like, oh yeah, I did this whenever I was in high school. And that kind of had an alignment to this thing that I'm doing in the Army. And it's not even the bigger, in the Army bucket. It's like you said, the bent towards leadership. It's probably even deeper than that. There were ways that you led that
mhm,
probably have some commonalities that went pre-Army and that now show up post-Army as well, would be my guess.
right.
Am I missing the boat or am I reading your mail?
Yeah, pretty good, pretty good. Yeah, pretty spot on. So I wonder then the trouble that people have with finding out their calling, right? Because not
Mhm.
everybody, like you said, it didn't happen overnight, right? It's not like you get an epiphany one day and like, oh yeah, I was going meant to be a missionary in East Africa and live poor.
Right.
People don't do that normally. Especially here in America, where it seems that so much of what we do is tied to who we are.
Hmm.
And I think that's a grave mistake that people make here, but it is what it is, and here we are.
Right.
So do you see people
Usually the
having trouble?
second question you get asked. First question is what's your name? Second question is what do you do?
Right, exactly. Right. You say obviously you said you do mainly work with Christians. So
Hmm.
what about the Christians having trouble figuring out what their calling is?
Hmm.
And yeah,
So first off, I want to normalize it a little bit. I think we all have to ask that question over and over again. What's our calling? The other part, or another way to phrase that, maybe a little easier to deal with, is what do I want to be when I grow up?
right.
And by the way, you could be 68 years old and still asking that question. There's
Yeah, true.
nothing wrong with that. That doesn't make you bad. That doesn't make you abnormal. That's very normal. But at the same time, I think a lot of times what happens is things get in the way.
Okay.
And this is why, I talk about being a stewardship coach. I help people with their time, their talent, and their treasures so that they can live out their calling. So what I mean by that is talent, let's start backwards. Let's go treasures first. Money can
Okay.
get in the way, right? Money can get in the way because you said it up front. I needed money to be able to survive.
Right.
There's a practical aspect to that, but there's also an emotional aspect to that. I think a lot of times as Christians, we unfortunately fall into the trap of making money the goal as opposed to
Mm,
money is simply a tool that we use. Money is something that we do need. Okay. And by the way, it tells us that in the Bible. It
yeah.
doesn't actually say money's evil. It says
True.
the love of money is evil, right? Putting money
Right.
before God is the problem. And that kind of happens to us. Money can get in the way because we're dealing with debt. We're dealing with trying to make enough money to
Mm,
survive. We're dealing with, how are we going to pay for kids' college? How are we going to save for retirement? How are we going to consume? Because part of what we use money for is consumption.
yep.
And oftentimes that consumption can be now where our comfort level goes up. So if you're in that situation where you're spending more than you make and then you get a raise, and so now you're spending more than you make again, and you kind of are constantly in that rat race of chasing the next lifestyle, the next car, the next whatever, you're in danger of you've created money as an idol instead of money as a tool.
Hmm.
So that can get in the way. And when that gets in the way, you're not free to make the choices that you need to make to do the things that God has put you on this planet to do.
Hmm.
That's a problem. Let's go to the other end, time. And the reason why I'm going to start with treasures and time is because most people see the problem in those areas quicker than they see the problem in talent. But we're going to end with talent. Time, the same thing happens. We're all busy. We've all got a million things to do. And if the same things keep getting dropped to the bottom of your to-do list and keep going to the someday maybe I'll go on that mission trip. Someday maybe I'll be able to spend more time with my kids and actually go to the soccer games because as their dad, I think that's important, but I'm always having to work the extra shifts instead. And I'm never at the soccer games, but I'll get there someday. Well, you mentioned you've got 3 children. Someday, pretty soon, that 5-year-old is a 10-year-old, or that 10-year-old is a 19-year-old, like I've got. Pretty soon, that 5-year-old, it takes 10 seconds. You look up and you're like, I never made it to the soccer game. I never made it to the soccer game. The time and the control of our time, in a way, is actually our most precious resource, because if you lose all your money, you can get more money.
Right. You can recover from it, right?
The time you spend is gone. Once you get 24 hours tomorrow. The great thing is you get another 24 hours tomorrow. The bad thing is whatever you've done in the past is done. You've spent that time, or you've used that time. And so if we're not efficient and effective in how we align our time with our purpose and with our calling and with our deeper whys, pretty soon we look up and the life that we wanted to have is gone. And, we're at the end of our life. That's never where we want to end up.
Right.
Now, the real truth is the underlying reason is that middle category, which is talent. Because at the end of the day, the way we handle our time, the way we handle our treasures, the way we handle our time and our money is really all about how we handle ourselves. It's about being able to look inside ourselves, have a deep, passionate why, know why we want to do the things we do, and then align the things we do with that why, with our values, with our priorities. The problem is many of us never stop to think about what are our values, what are our priorities, what do we want to be when we grow up, what do we want our life to look like, what are my dreams, what are my passions, what are the things that God has put in my heart and mind as the things to do. And now let me align the rest of my life with that, as opposed to fighting against it. And all of a sudden things start getting easier and flowing better. That's really what I do as a coach, is help people stop long enough and really process and think through, what is it I really want to do? What does it need? What am I supposed to do? How's it supposed to look? How's it supposed to show up? And then create systems and processes and habits and routines to create that reality.
Yeah. So I would say a lot of this comes down to priorities then. Right?
Absolutely.
This is one, this is something ran into my own life. I think, well, where do I have the time to do that? For instance, sometimes for interviews, I have to read books in preparation. One that's been waiting is a very thick book that I got to get around to. And it's not that I don't have enough time to do it. For instance, I just have to make it more important,
schedule it.
Less important. And that's why I see it in my life. I've seen that in plenty of, every time I hear somebody ask somebody, it's always the same thing. When I hear a Christian talk about how bad their life is going, not like, maybe not that's not like the way inside is going. I always ask the same question to them every single time is, what's your prayer life like? What's your Bible study life like? And the same answer every time. I don't have one.
What's your spiritual life like? Yeah.
Right. Well, it's the same answer. I don't have one. Okay. Well, why don't you pray? I don't have enough time to pray. I'm like, I guarantee there is something in your life that can shift around where you can,
if you wanted to.
And so, I really want to kind of hang in this whole prioritizing thing.
Let's start with the word for a minute. And I'm going to point out that you actually used the word priorities. That word actually did not exist for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. The word priority, singular, existed. The word priorities, plural, did not. The reason why is technically the word cannot be plural.
Okay, right.
Because the word priority means the thing that I put first. So by definition, if I have a plural priorities, it means I'm putting more than one thing first.
Mm.
You can't put more than one thing first. One thing is first, right?
Right.
So to some extent, it's about saying, what is the thing that is first in my life?
True.
What is
Yeah.
the thing that is the most important? And there's sort of a meta level, and then there's a practical level. So meta level, right? You know, you hear people say, God comes first, family comes second, everything else comes third.
Right.
And then at the same breath, they'll say, however, I don't read my Bible and I don't pray.
Right.
Does God really come first?
Exactly.
You know, because in practice, you're not living that out. You're not, you know, I only show up to church on Christmas and Easter. Okay, how are you putting God first? By the way, there may be an answer to that that's perfectly valid that doesn't include those things. You know, I'm open to that as a point. So if somebody's pushing back and going, no, I do have a deep life, but this is how I express it. Okay, I'm fine with that, because it doesn't, I don't necessarily demand that you express that priority the same way I do to
True.
be valid. Okay, it's, you know, there's a bit of holding, we can get real judgy if we do that, right? Well, you're not doing it the way I would do it, so therefore it's
Exactly.
wrong. Well, no, not necessarily. It could still be okay for them. But what I have found is a lot of times people will put lip service to God first and then not actually let that show up in their life. That's a problem. Okay, because
Exactly.
that's, you're not really playing that priority out. You know, family second, and yet you'll schedule a work event that conflicts with a family event all the time. Again, maybe you have to do that every once in a while. That's one thing. I'm talking about that happens time after time after time after time after time.
Yeah. Lifestyle
Excuse
is
me.
doing that. Lifestyle of it.
Excuse me. Sorry. If that,
Yeah.
you know, if that keeps happening over and over again, family's not second. Just admit that. Put work second and move on. Okay. But now if you say, wait a minute, I don't want to put work second. That's, no, that doesn't feel right. Okay, then change the way you're doing it. You know, change your actions. You've got to either, because otherwise it's cognitive dissonance, right?
Yeah.
This is the
Yeah.
fancy word for our brains don't like the fact when we say one thing and do something else. You know,
Yep.
and that's usually what's creating stress, because they'll say, you know, my family's important, and then they're frustrated because they're not living that out. Well, change it. Either admit that family's not important, or change what you're doing. Pick one. You know,
True.
because then
True.
at least there's alignment. You know, and by the way, sometimes people do pick, yeah, family's not important after all.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay, that's a choice. You know, not the one I would make, but it's a choice. And if you truly make that choice and live it out, at least you're living an authentic life.
Yeah. No
Then,
one dissonance.
you
Yeah.
know, there's no dissonance there. So a lot of it is that's kind of the metaphysical or the high level discussion. But then there's the, you know, practical things of,
True.
you know, are you actually sitting down and writing out what's important to you? Have you put down goals? You know, I love the people that they're like, well, I keep a to-do list. And I'm like, how many do you have? Well, I've got a list for my personal stuff. I've got a list for errands. I've got a list for work. I've got a list, you know, honey-do list for my wife. I've got, how many lives do you have?
True.
One.
Yeah.
Why do you have 5 lists then? You're one person, have one list, you know, because that's part of what happens is we get that trade-off, because we're not doing the honey-do list because we're working on the work list. Well, again, put it all together and kind of go, what is the next most important thing to do?
Right.
Be present where you're present. You know, if you're working, work. If you're at home, be at home. Instead, a lot of times we blend all of that stuff together, and we start, you know, we're checking email while we're at the dinner table, and we're doing all of these sorts of things that aren't healthy, aren't good, and start blurring those things. And now we're back to that metaphysical of, we've made a statement, family's important, but we're not living it out. So it, you know, the practical feeds into the theory, and the theory feeds into the practical. So a lot of it is about stepping back and setting up, you know, systems and processes. And we can talk about some examples if you want to, but it's first identifying what really are your priorities, what really are your values, what really is important. And then it's now, let's align our money, our time, all of these things with that, so that we actually end up living it out. And then, you know, going up another level, the larger umbrella is so that you can be free to actually do the things that God is putting on your heart and your mind and your soul to do.
Right. I mean, and we see this play out all the time, right? Especially
Mhm.
in America. Just I have to highlight America just because we're just so different from the rest of the world, and I probably, but well, I'll say in the West, not just America. We'll say in the
Yes,
West,
it's a
right?
Western thing. It is a
Yeah. Let
Western
me
thing.
say the West. That they'll say, like, people say, I prioritize my family. Well, why do you work late hours and you're never
Hmm.
home? Well,
Hmm.
because I want to provide for my family. But you said they're your priority. Then how come you're
Hmm.
never home with them, right?
Right.
And then sometimes these people watch their lives fall apart, and then they sit back.
Yeah.
How did that come about? Well, because you said this was your priority,
Right.
but
They
you
end up
weren't.
providing for their family through alimony and child support.
Yeah, exactly. And
You
it's
know.
like they run themselves ragged, and we do that. We do that. Thankfully, we only have a small house church, so it's not like a. But the full size churches, pastors will be like, okay, what's your priority, pastor? Well, it's this, and this, and how come you're on call 24/7 to your congregation,
Right.
and you never get a break and never spend,
Yeah. If
and,
if the pastor never takes a Sabbath, how are they giving a good example to the rest of the church?
right, right,
And I know pastors that don't take Sabbath. It is like, and Sabbath, by the way, does not mean Sunday. A lot of people
correct,
think, pastors don't usually take their Sabbath on Sunday because they're usually working on Sunday,
right,
but they have to still have a day that they set aside for rest and rejuvenation, and that they hopefully aren't getting 72 text messages from their church. And by the way, they should also tell their church when that is so that the church can leave them alone. That's the other one. I'm like, I've seen pastors that are like, yeah, Friday is my Sabbath. And it's like, you've never told anyone in your church that Friday's your Sabbath, and you get 400 text messages and you're mad about it.
right.
Have you ever communicated this? Oh, no, I haven't. Start there.
Yeah, true.
That's the first step. That kind
Uh,
of thing. But we do
yeah,
that in our personal life too. It
yeah,
doesn't just take a pastor. We all do it.
yeah. And funny because I just recently read an article. I think Joseph Maderer wrote it, and
Mhm.
it's how congregants abuse their pastors.
Mhm.
Very, very like wow. I mean, nothing out of the out, but and it's like you're right. So yeah. I guess yeah. So I know you say Christian, but you said
Mhm.
businessmen as well. A large portion of it. Yeah, but what about church leaders? How often have you had them come to you like, I don't know what to do, or oh
Sure.
my, whatever it is that they need from you?
Yeah, I've had clients that are pastors. I've had clients that are, lay people, or otherwise involved in the church leadership kind of role. I've gone in and done workshops for larger churches for their staff. I've gone on and done workshops for congregants. Both of those are valid. Like I said, most of my clients are small business owners. 100% are at least faith friendly because we're going to talk about God.
Right.
So if you don't want to talk about God, I'm probably not the right coach for you. but but I do have a Jewish and Muslim clients. We still talk about God. It's just that doesn't bother me if it doesn't bother them. I'm Christian. That's my faith background. I'm a Methodist. I you you know I don't care if you're a Methodist. I don't care if you, but you do have to at least be faith friendly usually, because again, I'm going to talk about God. The rest of it is, again, I've had pastors, I've had faith leaders of different sorts, I've had folks that are business owners, I've had folks that work in the corporate world and still want to do other things, or are trying to get their corporate world under control so that they can do other things.
Mm,
All of that is a possibility. you know Again, the filters are faith friendly. I use that instead of Christian, even though I talk, a lot of Christians. Uh, a lot of my clients are couples, and
mm,
there's a lot of fighting and stress and strain in the relationship because of money, because of time, because of misalignment of those things. Again, you just described it. The husband says, my family's important, so I'm working 72 hours a week so that I can provide for them, and the wife's like, I just want to see you at home occasionally.
right.
But they're fighting about it. And part of what I can do is come in, because here's the thing: you're in your life, you're in the weeds, you're in the middle of the forest. The nice thing about a coach is I'm not in the forest. I'm 30,000 feet above the forest going. So my joke is a lot of times my job as a coach is to tell you what you already know.
True. Yep.
And just say it out loud, because it. It's usually not lack of knowledge that keeps us from doing things. You can Google how to do a budget. You can Google how to do a to-do list. You can take courses on this stuff. You can do all of that and learn knowledge. Most people listening to this have probably done something like that at some point. If you're still not doing it, then hire a coach, because usually it's not the knowledge part that's holding us back. It's the accountability. It's there's something about, I got to call Scott on Tuesday and tell him I didn't do any of the stuff that I said I was going to do this week. That makes you more likely to do the stuff this week,
right?
Because it's real easy to lie to ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
It's much harder to lie to somebody else. Most of us will lie to ourselves all day long, weekend.
Oh, yeah.
Most of us do it. By the way, most of the times we're lying to ourselves in a negative way, not a positive way. I was doing a workshop for about 500 entrepreneurs, all very successful. All of them, everyone in the room ran businesses that everyone else would look at and say is successful, $1 million plus businesses, ran teams of people, highly successful people by the world's token. Most of them were highly spiritual people and very involved in the church and gave to charity and did things that most people would look at and go, wow, they're also living out a really good spiritual life. And I said to them, how many of you have a voice in your head that talks to you? Raise your hand. Mm-hmm. Every single hand went up, right? We all have that voice. And I said, now keep your hand up if the voice is nice. Every hand went down.
Ooh, wow.
Why? Because we will say things to ourselves in the inside of our head that we would never say to another human being out loud.
Wow. Yeah.
Right? And yet we'll say to her, I'm a failure. I'm worthless. God doesn't love me. I must be, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, think about it. We've all said that to ourselves from time to time. And part of it, some of us all the time, and part of working to get that alignment is to quiet that voice in your head and to teach that voice to say what's really true, which is, I may have failed at this, but that doesn't make me a failure. I maybe didn't do this thing that I said I was going to do, but that doesn't mean that's always going to be true.
Mm-hmm.
People have a tendency to do what I call the 3 Ps. It's catastrophic thinking. Something happens and we try to make it permanent, personal, and pervasive. So you failed at something. Your business failed.
Right.
Just using that as an example. Your church failed if you're a pastor, whatever. Your marriage failed. Something went wrong. And you immediately go, I'm a failure. That's personal. I've always been a failure. That's permanent. Okay. And not only did my marriage fail, everything I do fails. That's pervasive. When you start creating that in your head, well, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy.
True.
Instead, if you can get out of that channel and get into the channel that God actually wants us to be in, which is not limiting beliefs, but enabling truths, and understand, you're a child of God. That means you're going to fail. Okay. Because quite frankly, if you never fail, it means you never tried anything. You never did anything. You never pushed yourself. You never stretched.
That's true. I mean, I think it was Thomas Edison, they asked him, about how many times he failed. He's like, no.
I didn't fail 10,000 times. I found 10,000 that didn't work. Okay?
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. By the way, it's an exaggeration. He didn't actually try 10,000 times, but regardless, the point is still the same. The quote still works. But you have a tendency to do that. We have that catastrophic thinking. So it's, that's why I joke and I say, people come for help with time and talent. What we work on, with time and treasures, what we work on is talent, because it's, this, our head and our heart is really what determines where we're going, much more than, the actual quote. Yeah, I can give you tools and techniques and tricks and, tips. And those are important. You do want to create habits and systems and processes and all of that stuff, because that's actually going to get you further than just sheer willpower. Okay. but you still got to have the willpower to get started, to make the habits form and to do all of that. So willpower is still there. It's just not, we often say, you know, I'm going to do it. I must have no willpower. I must be lazy. That's why I don't do it. No, it's not that you're lazy, and it's not that you don't have willpower. It's that you haven't yet gone through the actions that help facilitate things and make it easier. That's the tools and tips and tricks. So that is important. But more important than that is the underlying things. What's your why? What's your reason? What's your emotional connection? You know, what's your gut telling you? What's your brain telling you? What's your mindset? How do you view yourself and the world? Are you able to communicate? Do you understand that people are wired different than you, and that's okay? You know, and are you able to still have conversations and facilitation with them? You know, it's like earlier when I said, making sure that I said, you know, this is, you're not walking out your spiritual life, or if you are, you know, that's fine. It may be different than I am. It's okay to be different. It's not okay to not do something, you know.
I wonder how many times you find that people are defeated because it's a difficult thing, which, by the way, to me is normal, right? I mean, it takes, I forgot I can't remember now, but it takes a while to break a habit, you know, and form a new habit. It takes.
Yeah. So the research, you'll see your best case scenario is it takes about 21 days to form a habit. Your worst case scenario, actually the more realistic scenario, it's over 60 days of doing something the same way to start to create a habit. It also depends, and breaking a habit, by the way, takes longer than that. So once you've got a bad habit, stopping the bad habit and replacing it with a good habit can take even longer. At the same time, you can start forming a habit in 2 seconds. Or 10 seconds, right? You can do lots of tips and techniques to make it easier, like habit stacking, which is connect a new habit to an existing habit. So you probably get out of bed every morning. You probably have a cup of coffee every morning. You probably brush your teeth every morning. These are already existing habits. So you can tie a new habit that you're trying to form to one of those existing habits. So if I want to have prayer life, okay, put my prayer journal next to my coffee pot and make it while my coffee's brewing. I open my prayer journal or open my Bible, and I do the first, all I'm doing is tying a new habit to the old habit. And, you know, so you can do things like that to make it easier. But a lot of times task avoidance really kind of comes down to one of 3 buckets. One is we set a task and we make it too big. We have a task like, I want to write a book.
Right.
What does that look like? You know,
Practically.
Practically, what does it mean? I want to write a book. You know, it's so gigantic that you're never going to get started. It's going to stay on your task list forever. If instead you literally break it down and conceivably to the smallest step of, I'm going to open a word processing document. That's like the first step, right?
Yeah, right.
That actually can get you moving. And then once you're moving, you know, an object in law of inertia, right? Newton's law, an object in motion tends to remain in motion until acted by an outside force. The rest of that law, by the way, is an object at rest tends to remain at rest until acted upon by the outside force. So the truth is, if you're not moving, you tend to continue to not move. And if you are moving, you tend to continue to move. That's true for us as well. So that's kind of getting that started. So the big task, a lot of times it's breaking it down into smaller and smaller chunks until you get it to such a small chunk that it's like, well, this is a no-brainer. I mean, I can open a Word document, click, click. Okay, it's open. Now what? You know, what's my next step? Well, my next step is to actually put some words on the thing. So start journaling, start writing. Because once you started writing, now you're already writing. Even if it's not about the book, it's still, you've started that process. So it's getting the big chunks and breaking them down into smaller chunks. The second kind of bucket is a lot of times you have things on your task list, you know how to do them, and they're small enough tasks that you can do them. You just don't want to do them. There's something that's not fun. It's not pleasant. You don't enjoy it. You know, making a doctor's appointment to get your yearly physical, kind of task avoidant about that, because like, you know, don't really enjoy it. You know,
Right.
don't want to go to the doctor. Don't want to have them tell me that my cholesterol level's too high and I'm too fat. You know, it's
True.
like, right. You know, I don't want that news. So it's like, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to schedule the appointment. So those things, those avoidant kind of task avoidant things, a lot of times there it's either schedule it, which means like literally put it on my calendar and say, I'm going to do this at 2 p.m. You know, put it on the Tuesday list. Now, truth is you can still move it to tomorrow. So there's still some willpower involved to actually follow through on it, but scheduling it can help. The other part of that is actually, again, tying it to some sort of reward and punishment can help. So this is saying, I'm going to give you an extreme example. I actually had a client do this.
Okay.
They were a foodie. There was a particular restaurant in town that they really wanted to eat at. It was a little expensive, but they had the money. It wasn't going to, you know, money wasn't really the offset. It was just, they didn't really feel like they deserved going to this restaurant. So that was got to be their reward. If they got this task done in the next 30 days, they're going to the restaurant. Okay. So now they needed a punishment. They needed something that if they didn't finish it in 30 days, they would really not want this to happen. So in this case, by the way, the client chose this. This is not something I enforced on them from the outside. I want to make that perfectly clear. They, let's just say that there was an organization that they really didn't agree with the stance of this organization at all, like a lot. Like they really wish this organization would just spontaneously disappear from the earth, kind of thing. Okay. So they wrote a check for $1,000, mailed it to me, made out to that organization. And they said, if I don't complete this task by the end of 30 days, mail the check. They would just make $1,000 donation in their name to this organization that they hated. By the way, I ripped the check up and mailed it back to them because they finished the task. Okay. Because it was both a good enough reward and a good enough punishment that they wanted to follow through on it. There's no way they wanted that $1,000 check going to this organization with their name attached to it, right? That was like, no. And the restaurant, that's kind of cool. I want to do that. So reward and punishment is another. The other one is a lot of times you'll have tasks that are on there that you've kind of put on the list because you think they belong on the list, but you haven't really figured out any sort of emotional attachment to them. Any reason why? Who cares? You know, why do you want to do it? What's important about it? What pleasure does it create in your life? How does it align to your priorities and your values? How does it make, you know, your relationships better, or make you healthier, or make you feel better, or make you whatever, right? Some sort of deep why, some sort of emotional connection. A goal has a beginning, a middle, and an end. You know, when a goal is ended. A why does not have a beginning, a middle, and an end because it's an emotional attachment. You can attach that emotion to a lot of different goals, right? So that's, you know, kind of that deeper reason. And a lot of times we never even think about what the deeper reason is. And by the way, a lot of times tasks can be in all three of these buckets or two of them. You know, it's possible to be in more than one. And these are some techniques to use to kind of get those tasks moving, because all of us have them. How many of you have, you know, I'm asking the listeners like they can answer, but go ahead and answer out loud. How many of you have a task that's been on your task list for more than a month?
Right. Everybody should raise their.
Everyone should raise their hand.
This was the audience to be raising their hand.
You know, it's like, because it's we task avoidant about certain tasks. And by the way, it's also valid to examine a task, look at it, and go, "What's my why?" Well, it really isn't one. It's not that the task is too big. It's actually a small enough task that I can do, and it's not really just one I'm putting off. That's really, you know what? Never mind. Take the task off my list. I'm just not going to do it. That's a valid answer, by the way, you know, to look at something that's been hanging around on your list for 6 months and go, I'm just not going to do it. You know,
that's right.
It's okay.
It's kind of like me and my side of the bed, you know, in the room, and my wife keeps saying, where are you gonna, you know, pick that up or pick that up? And I'm like,
may never happen.
Probably never, because you're, you know, all those steps. I know it's funny, but it's true, because you know, you're talking about the kids are a reason attachment. And I'm like, I don't really have a motivation in any category.
Now, using that as an example, though, if there's an emotional attachment to it for your wife, and you have an emotional attachment to your wife, That's your emotional attachment.
There you go.
I'm going to
Yeah.
do this not because I have any real drive to do it, but because it drives my wife crazy and I want to make my wife happy because I love my wife.
Right.
That could be a reason. Now, I'm not trying to pick on you, but that, that may be enough of a why to go, because there are some things I do, like, my joke is, fake your enthusiasm. You married people, help the single people, because as a married person, you're used to faking your enthusiasm. Because think about it, your wife comes downstairs and goes, let's go to the fabric store today. Yes, dear,
Right.
I'd love to go to the fabric store with you. No, you don't.
Right.
But
True.
guess what? We'll do it because we love our wives,
Right.
and it makes our wife happy, and we want her to enjoy life and be happy. So it's, and by the way, there's things that she does for you because she doesn't want to do them, but it makes you happy too.
Mhm.
It's a two-way street on this one. But
Exactly.
that's, that can be the emotional reason, is maybe it's not for you, maybe you're actually doing it for someone else.
That's a good point.
That can be okay. It can also not be okay. Again, the joke is none of these things are ever absolutes, right? There's always a gray area. Because, for instance, I don't want to go to the doctor that only became a doctor because his mother wanted him to become a doctor. I want to go to the doctor that became a doctor because he wanted to become a doctor, or she wanted to become a doctor, right? Because so there's also a way you can be doing something for someone else and living out the life that someone else wants for you. That's a negative as well.
Nice. Right. So yeah, excuse me. We have some examples, but now I know that this is not, the life coach show, and people are going to listen to this, and all of a sudden one day they're going to email me and say, wow, I'm so glad you listened to your show. My life changed forevermore after that. And the odds of that happening are probably going to be slim to none, but that's okay. But at least, because everything you say, like I apply this in the army, everybody tells me that's my wife was studying this. I was like, yeah, this is exactly what he's in the army, like we would do counseling with soldiers, and on the back would be the plan of action. And what you were supposed to do was, it was supposed to be their plan of action, right? So they would say, for instance, I want to get better at my 2-mile run, right? For my PT test. And you say, okay, well, how are you going to do that? What are you going to do that? Right. And be like, well, I'm going to run on, I don't know, Saturdays and Sundays, for instance. Right. Like, okay, good idea. And then next month, whatever the plan action.
How long are you going to run? How far are you going to run? Give me some details. What does that look like?
Yeah. Then we would follow up next month, because it'd be right there on paper. Like, okay, well, this is what, but so this is, what we're talking about.
That's a lot of what coaching is.
Right.
Coaching and counseling have some overlap. The way I describe the difference is counseling has a tendency to look backwards to help you unpack past events so that you can move forward effectively. Coaching has a tendency to look forward so that you can be future focused, so you can move forward effectively. You're going to the same place. You just depends on which half of the equation you need to work on.
Exactly.
But I'm a firm believer in counseling too.
So yeah, is there any more? Because you've given really great practical advice already. Really, I think if people decide they want to apply it, then yeah, they're gonna at least start moving forward, right? They're gonna at least start to be that object in motion. But before we end out the show, is there anything else you would like to give people practical advice in this, way of doing things, doing life?
Sure. So a lot of it, I'll share a way that they can get some more resources too, if they're interested, or get some follow up. But a lot of this really comes down to that first step is actually stopping long enough to kind of figure out, again, what do you want to be when you grow up? So I'll give you a quick activity that can kind of help with that. And there's different versions of this activity, but this is the one kind of I like, because it's kind of an experience that most people have had. So imagine, you've gone to an airport, and your flight's supposed to leave at 8 a.m. and you got there early, and you've checked through security and all of that. You get to the gate, and sure enough, the sign at the gate says flight delayed. It's not leaving for 4 hours. So now you're stuck in the airport for 4 hours with nothing to do, right? So what do we all do? You go somewhere to go find a restaurant to go get something to drink or something to eat, and find a quiet place to sit, and kind of do that. And you go, and you're trying to grab a Coke or water or whatever it is, And next to you in line is a friend of yours who you haven't seen for 8 years. They were a good friend, but they moved and you moved and you drifted apart, and you've kind of talked to them a few times in that 8 years, but you really haven't seen them for 8 years. And you're like, wow, it's so great running into you. Haven't seen you. Yeah, I'm going to Boston, and they say I'm going to LA, and turns out their flight is delayed as well. And you both got 4 hours to go grab a quiet corner and catch up. And your friend looks at you and you goes, David, it's so great. I haven't caught up with you for 8 years. And what has your last 8 years been like? And you say, this has been the best 8 years of my life because your job is to fill in what comes after the word because. What would have made the next 8 years of your life the best 8 years of your life? What has happened? What's happened in your relationships? What's happened in your work? What's happened in your spiritual life? What's happened in your physical life, your fitness life? What's happened, in all of these different areas, in your financial life, in your business life, whatever it is, break down all of the different kind of roles and components and write down, like, tell me a story. What made the next 8 years of your life the best 8 years of your life? Because what comes after because then now you have a destination, now you kind of go, this is what I want, and you can use 5 years instead of 8 or 3 years instead of 5. There's nothing magical about this. It's a version of what they call the obituary exercise, which is write your own obituary, write what people will say about you when you die. I have a different version of that when I use it's a little nicer than writing what it is, but they're all versions of getting you to think about the future and then project backwards into the past and say, what do I want my life to look like? Because once you have that picture, now you've got a destination to go towards and to move towards. And that's really what we're after. Now, if you're still stuck and having trouble getting moving, get help, get counseling, get with a coach, get with other accountability partners, a mastermind, something, plug into something to give you that external accountability so that you push forward. That can be helpful, but you still got to have that destination before any of that. Otherwise, if you don't know where you're going, anywhere will work, right? That's what the Cheshire Cat says in Alice in Wonderland. You don't know where you're going, any route will get you there because it doesn't matter. So this is kind of getting that destination in place. I do have some tools, and in fact, there's a version of that exercise and a couple of other things over on my website. So if folks are interested, they can go to inspiredstewardship.com/restoring for your show. And I got some exercises they can download. There's even a place if they want to have a chat, they can schedule a 30-minute call, no obligation, no pressure, no, high sales tactic or anything like that. It's really just having a chat. If they're interested in maybe following up with coaching and that kind of thing. But then there's some downloads on time and talent and treasures that they can use if there's kind of an area they want to dive deeper in, or they can do all three.
Awesome. Yeah. And I'll definitely link that in to the show notes as well as anywhere else that you're available. So yeah. Where else are you available that people can reach you at?
You can usually, again, the best place to find me is that inspiredstewardship.com. It's got links to all my social media and all of that sort of stuff as well. But yeah, I'm on Twitter or Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn and all of that. So you can usually either find me under Steward Coach or Scott Maderer. My last name is spelled Maderer, but depending, like on LinkedIn, I'm as Maderer, but on the other ones I'm usually a Steward Coach.
All right, awesome. Yeah, and then like I said, I'll link all those into the show notes so everybody can check them out. Yeah, I appreciate you coming on the show. I really do. I think it's going to be helpful, and just tell the audience, don't feel ashamed if I got to reach out to this guy and I need his help for whatever reason. Reach out, okay? We're the body of Christ, especially if you're a Christian. We're the body of Christ. We're supposed to bear one another's burdens and all of that kind of thing. And it comes in different, that role comes in different shapes and sizes and callings and all that. So I appreciate you coming on the show, Scott.
Absolutely. Glad to be here.
All right. So that will end the show. And I'll say, I'll see you all later. Bye for now.